Well, a buffalo, a bison. Yeah. Who doesn't want to be a mermaid at some point, right?
If you go to Ms. Campbell's office, she's still there.
Yeah.
I don't know, I assume she's still there.
Yeah. And she's back
She
this
has
semester.
not in her office.
Oh, very cute.
I made her one. I mean, what was it? It was like a flip flop.
Hard to drive in.
True, you're boring. Driving in it.
I'm gonna wait just another minute or so. I know there was a lot of traffic this morning. Give people another minute.
I know, right? Yeah.
Good.
I know.
Oh, it's so many.
But I'm like, there's too many calling you. We need to really balance it out. Like on the.
All right. We'll go ahead and we'll start, and then if people come in, did everyone survive the rain and the traffic this morning? Yeah, I love the rain. I love it so much, but it makes it a pain to drive. Like nobody knows how to drive.
California, no, they can't drive in California.
I know, right? And then you had the rain, right? And then when we had that huge windstorm, like 3 weeks ago, it ripped so many shingles off of our roof, and so the second it rains, it just comes in. So it's been exciting, you know. Anyway, I hope everyone's doing all right. I have another guest today. So the perks of being a parent of twins, if one does something, the other has to do something immediately. So so this is my older twin, Emma, right? Paisley's like my pastel twin, and this is my goth twin, right? So right, very, very different personalities, but Emma's joining us today. You want to say hi? Hi. All right. Okay. So we'll jump back into where we were last time. We'll keep going on this, and we're kind of getting caught up. And again, we're so close to the disorders. Like they're so soon. We're almost there. I feel like I keep saying that. Like we're about to get anxious soon.
The last day of class.
Right, the last day. Right, we'll get there eventually. So we left here. Right, this is a really kind of important thing. Just to drive home again. Right, especially if you take like a research methods class. Right, these are things that you would really focus on. There's different subtypes of each, of course. But everything that we're going to talk about from here are things that ideally have good reliability, good validity, and are standardized. Now, everything has like a kind of on a spectrum of how well these things are existing in it. But ideally, if it doesn't, have these three things again, like the information that you get from it's going to be really useless. So we want to keep those things in mind. And then what we'll talk about from here are how are all of the different ways, what are all the different ways that we can assess somebody to try and arrive at a diagnosis, right? So the idea is when somebody goes into therapy or counseling, right, we have to give them a diagnosis. Right? So we have to gather information in order to do that accurately. And so when you go into therapy for the very first time, it can be a little bit frustrating because oftentimes people take a long time to get into therapy, right? Whether that's because you were struggling with the motivation, the insurance, the coverage, whatever it might be, that first session that you go into is always what we call a clinical interview. And the entire time is just asking you questions to get to know you and to understand what brought you into therapy that day, right? Or in general. And so this is called a clinical interview. And it's just a face-to-face conversation or encounter with a clinician where they're going to ask you a bunch of different questions. Tell me about your history. Tell me about your family history. What symptoms are you experiencing? What brought you into it? And the whole thing, again, is just gathering data. And so that we can try and arrive at some kind of conclusion. The interesting thing is in the middle of this, they kind of slip in very subtly what's called a mental status exam. And it's really, I had a unique opportunity, like a couple of weeks ago, my oldest went into therapy for the first time. And I got to sit in on her clinical interview. And like, I got to watch, I was sitting behind the therapist desk. And I got to see all of the questions for this, which was kind of fun. I mean, and I've seen them before as a therapist. But with this, they're oftentimes looking at things that are more like nonverbal cues. How does the person present? Like, do they look like they have good hygiene? Are they dressed appropriately? Are they aware of the time and date, right? Do they know when and where they are? And that might seem like common sense, but not always, right? If people have like schizophrenia, for example, or some kind of delusional disorder, they might not know when or where they are in that moment. So like sometimes they'll ask, do you know what day of the week it is? Who's the president of the United States, right? What is the weather today, right? How aware are you of your surroundings? Which can give kind of interesting information about somebody's mental, like, fitness, if you will. Yeah. Yeah.
So like, everyone who tells I'm not actually paying attention, and I'm just like, what if they think that I have ADHD? So I need like, like looking everywhere in the room. So I'm just like, that's kind of tough.
Yeah.
To gauge.
Yeah, it really changes things quite a bit. And like telehealth and like video therapy has become so popular, especially during COVID. Almost everything went virtual and a lot of places stayed virtual. And there is a little bit of a loss that comes with that, but then nice flexibility too. So it's a little bit of like a give and take, but I think you can easily miss some of this stuff or like misinterpret somebody's behavior because it's just a very different tone when you're online instead of in person. Yeah.
Thing has some purpose, like telehealth has some purpose, then as opposed to going to see a clinician and being like, okay, I needed to see a real person. Like telehealth, sometimes they try to validate your emotions or they try to like help you understand like what's happening, but when it comes to treatments and things like that, I feel like you need to see a person for that. As opposed to if you're just going to get help or like asking like, am I alone? Am I not alone?
Sure.
That's like the first step I feel like, compared to clinician, which is like the rest of the journey.
Yeah, and it's tricky, right? Because there is a lot you can do virtually, right? But it depends on the type of therapy, right? Some are a little bit more hands-on, or it's way more conducive in person, and others it's okay, right? So I think it depends on the person and the disorder and the treatment, but it has a lot of challenges to it. But it's become a very popular way of delivering therapy, especially like starting with COVID. So this is probably the most frequently used because it's part of every single intake, right? When a person comes in, you always start here, but there's a lot of other things that we can do. And some of them are only done under certain circumstances. And that's the case with this one. So if we believe that somebody might have something physical or biological contributing, we could order some kind of neurological or physiological test. Now, this would only be if we suspect something physical is going on, right? Think back to that biological model that we talked about. So if we think that someone might have like brain structures that are damaged or something physically going on, we might order something like a CAT scan or a PET scan or an MRI, right? Lots of different tests that we could add to our battery. And that's a phrase that we sometimes use. We use a battery of tests, which just means a bunch of them, right? We use a bunch of different things to gather information and make a conclusion. So this may or may not be relevant, depends on the person and what they're presenting with. But oftentimes, if there's a biological indicator, we might order something like a PET scan or a CAT scan or an MRI. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, because I had cancer 8 years ago, and for them to finally die in like the cancer in their body,
Yeah.
they did the PET scan die,
And you were allergic to it.
and I was allergic to it.
Did you know that going in?
Nope.
Yeah, it can't be super common. I don't think I've ever heard that
So
before.
that's a fun fact.
Yeah, I'm sure that was not a fun day.
Not at all.
No.
I got really hot and cheated all the time.
Yeah. Oh, that doesn't sound fun. And like PET scans and MRIs, right? They're fairly invasive. If any of you, how many of you have had like an MRI at some point? Right? A lot of you, right? And you can do this on the brain. It can be done on any part of the body. And sometimes they inject you with a dye so that they can track something, and other times they don't, right? So with that resolution or without. But oh wow, that's uncomfortable, right? But I'm glad that you made it through. One that's used a little more often, but this one's used a lot with kids. Okay, so intelligence tests, very commonly used with children, especially in like a school setting, where we're measuring your intellectual ability or your IQ, your intelligence quotient. If you've ever taken stats or it's on your horizon to take at some point, you'll see that beautiful like bell curve. Right? And with IQ, kind of have this middle like average score. Anyone know what an average IQ is? Good to guess? What was that? Yeah. 100, yeah, you have it. 100, right? So almost the entire population falls within like 1 or 2 standard deviations. So almost everybody is like in here. But sometimes your IQ can be something that's really relevant, right? Like if you're really low on your IQ or really high on your IQ, like 2 standard deviations up or down, sometimes that can be diagnostically relevant, right? It might be something that helps us to make a diagnosis. Yeah.
I don't know, I honestly don't know like how high.
How high does it go?
Like.
I don't know what the highest ever, somebody look it up. What's the highest ever? Right, yeah.
Someone.
167. Somebody look it up, like on your phone. What was the highest IQ ever like measured? Let me know if you find it. No, so I don't think there's necessarily, right, it doesn't tap out at 1200, right? But there is like, yeah, did you find it?
276 and it's don't him from South Korea.
276. Do you have the same? Wow, 276. So that would be like over here. You know? That's really, really, really far. What was Einstein's? I thought Einstein was like 167, right? So, I mean, even Einstein, so a standard deviation for IQ is 15, right? So the 115, 130. So technically anything over 130 is considered gifted. So Einstein would be way over here to something, right? That's like behind this, right? So most people, again, like 98% of the world fall within this range here, right? But if you're extremely far in one end or the other, that's diagnostically relevant. And especially, like I said, with kids, we use this a lot with children in school. And there's a lot of different tests you can use. The most commonly used one is called the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, or the WAIS. Now, I've taken this 3 or 4 times, like as part of like graduate school, you often get to take these tests that you are learning to administer. These blocks are my nemesis. Oh my gosh, I'm so bad. It takes my IQ score every time. I'm like, I hate you blocks.
Wait, that's my dream.
Yeah.
No, they should tell my, hey, I didn't want to do that crap. They like, my parents made me do it.
Sure.
And at the time, I smoked a lot, so I got really high. So they told my parents that I was like basically like stupid. And like, guys, it's like they have to try. My parents like, that's weird. Like, she was gifted and all that. I'm like, yeah, guys, it's good. No, because they're like, put this block in the hole. I'm like,
Yeah.
are you kidding me? I'm not 5 years old. Sorry. But
Right.
so you're, oh, sorry.
That's okay. She's used to it. She's used to it. It's fine. I mean, look, she's wearing a My Chemical Romance shirt. She's all about that and like, we're good. We're good. But you know, you bring up a good point though, right? So if somebody is in an altered state of mind, or if they don't have any motivation to do it, that's going to tank their score, right? And that's something that a trained clinician should recognize. So rather than saying like you had a low IQ, it might be there were circumstances that affected the IQ score, right? Yeah.
Could be true, but I just think,
Yeah, and a lot of people feel that way. And a lot of people, you know, they sneak these in sometimes, right? It can be something that's very formally administered, or it can be something that's kind of done in pieces. And sometimes that can shape the results too. Yeah.
I remember in elementary school, I took the test for it, but it was like to get into like a gifted program or something
Okay.
like that in elementary school. But like, I didn't know what it was. My parents just told me, hey, you're gonna go and take this test, and we're not gonna tell you anything about it.
Uh-huh.
And it was just like, I go to take this test, and it's just a bunch of random questions, and
Sure.
I'm like, what in the heck am I actually looking at? And then it turns out I was only like a couple points off
Okay.
from making it, and then they were like, yeah, no, just go back. And I'm like, what? That. So this did nothing. Nobody told me ever what it was about. I
Interesting.
figured it out.
Yeah.
Like a few years ago what it was.
And like I said, sometimes they'll be really transparent and tell you, and other times not so much, right? There was another hand over here. if you wanna do it, okay, so usually it's done by like a school psychologist in a school setting. But you can often go to like a private, company and have them done. They probably will charge you to do it versus in a school setting, it's usually, in the classroom. But they're less relevant for adults. Most of the time we do this when you're younger. And again, it's oftentimes to help us diagnose things like ADHD or learning disabilities or intellectual developmental disorder, things like that. Once you're older, it matters less, what your IQ is, right? Except for maybe like bragging. Yeah.
What's really interesting is that I literally just went through this test when I started here. And because I've never been diagnosed with anything,
Yeah.
it was almost like I was a child in a way. But the one thing I did really well on was anything to do with puzzles.
Right.
To the point where it was like, I've never seen anyone do them this way ever, and I've been doing this like my whole life. And I just zip through, but anything to do with like processing,
Yeah.
forget it. I was like, it took me like days, I'm talking multiple appointments, just to like finish, a thought in a way, you know what I'm saying?
And the nice thing about these is they have a lot of different scales on them, right? So like you're describing, so I have this image here, this is from the waist, right? So there's like a bunch of different types of tests that are made up of these, right? That is made up of. And so the nice thing is if you're really bad at spatial stuff, which I am, like I'm horrible at spatial things where they give you this, and they say recreate it. Like you can give me all the time in the world, it's gonna take you forever to recreate it. But then they also give you vocabulary and math and patterns. And they give you things like pictures that you have to identify what's missing. And then at the end, we take all of the scores, combine them together and get an average, and then that's your IQ. So the plus side of this is it accounts for all these different skill sets, right? So if you're really good at puzzles, you're really good at vocabulary, that might be offset by the fact that you're not so great at math or patterns. So it does account for a lot of different types of intelligence, which there are. Yeah. Uh-huh. Wow, that's pretty extensive, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, especially to take so many, that's so comprehensive, right? You have a battery of tests, right? It took months for you. Oftentimes it's a little less invasive than that, but it can be depending on what we're evaluating. Yeah.
The scoring is kind of static compared to when you're younger and you're an adult.
How true is that? Like,
Yeah.
does it really change much or?
Yeah, your IQ is something that tends to stay pretty stable. And the reason for that is if you look at how we calculate IQ, it takes your age into account, right? And so what happens is you might progress, but your age progresses too. And so that number tends to stay pretty static. And you can say that might be one limitation of these because people do grow a little bit with their like intelligence, but not always dramatically. It tends to be pretty like pretty static. Yeah. So they will probably take this, but with modified time. Oh, right. And it might even be modified like scale for how it's interpreted. So oftentimes the same test, but with modified to help account for like differences. And oftentimes, you know, their score will be lower, but that might be something that you would expect given, you know, the diagnosis. Maybe not. Right? Or it could be higher, right? Oftentimes people who are on the spectrum might have an area of giftedness. Exactly. Yeah.
What that area of giftedness, have they ever included like musical talents in this? They do?
This one doesn't necessarily have any kind of like musical element to it. But I mean, but that's the tricky thing, right? Is there are so many different types of intelligence. Probably the biggest criticism of these tests is does it account for all of them? Because sometimes people are musically gifted and that might not be accounted for here. Like their IQ might be low, but their musical ability might be through the roof.
Or like hearing, if they can hear
Yeah.
something and repeat or memory, or it's like it's memory, just like that, that's not on this exam.
Right. Yeah, and so, you know, that's something you have to always keep in mind, right? That there are going to be differing skills that might not always be accounted for. I have an intelligence test for you for fun, right? This one is better than the Oreo test, but it's got issues, right? So I want you to be thinking about what those issues might be because we'll talk about it after. So I'm going to give you I'm gonna give you like 8 minutes or so to take this. Please work on it on your own and don't look up the answers, right? It's tempting, I know, but let me hand this out to you and then we'll all, don't start it yet, but so we can all start at the same time. Totally informal and for fun, so it means nothing but fun.
Don't tell me I'm like. No, I mean, no, I think so.
Oh, okay. Even still.
No, I have 5 right now.
I have to tell you, every time I
You
get
can
up
have
papers.
one class or you can
I
have
think
like 7. I think 7's the max.
Maybe I do, because I can pass out papers. So it also, I do,
Yeah, it's really.
Wow.
So the classes are worth more credits, but like this class, it's only 3 credits.
Well, like my stats class, yeah.
Yeah, like my chemistry class
Okay,
is
here
5.
I'm gonna explain. Okay, does everyone have one?
I have 5. I was like.
Okay, so let me explain. Some of you are giving me this look like I failed already, right? Like, let me explain. Okay, so this again is a very informal test. And there are some serious issues with it, which we'll talk about. But number one, so if you're looking at this, anyone know what the answer would be? Hours in a day. See, now feeling better? Okay. So number one, H in a D, you're figuring out what the H and D stand for, so hours in a day. Okay, so I'm gonna give you till 9. Okay, so about 8 minutes or so. Okay, so do your best. If you don't know it, skip it, right? And again, no pressure, this is just for fun, but do the best you can. Get about 5 more minutes, the best you can. Few more minutes. Just about another minute or so. Again, just do your best. So go ahead and finish up whichever one you're on. Okay, so again, this isn't a Greek test of intelligence, and I want to talk about why in a few minutes, but let's get the answers first. If you're close, give yourself credit. If you're not, that's okay, right? Some of these are really obscure, right? And some of them are a little less, so, okay, so number one, we already said, how about number two? Do you know, if you know what it is, say it out loud, it's number two. Letters of the alphabet, nice job. Number three,
7 days in a week.
days of the week. Number four,
Wonders of the world.
wonders of the world, nice job. It's so obvious after you see it, but before then, not so much, right? How about number five?
Species of wisdom.
It's a good guess, right? Signs of the zodiac. Oh, everyone is jealous of your intellectual ability. Okay, how about number six? Books of the Bible, nice job. Nice, okay, how about number seven? Cards in a pack without jokers.
Like, that makes no sense.
I know.
That's so complicated.
How about number eight? Stripes in the United States flag.
Oh.
US flag, Number nine. Holes on a golf course. Number 10 is my personal favorite. Yeah, what's number 10?
10 is 31 flavors of
Yeah.
basketball.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
I knew.
was my favorite one. Right? Okay, number 11. Pose on a foot. Next up. Number 12. Math people.
Oh,
Degrees and a right angle. Next up. Number 13. Three blind mice see how they run. See? Yep. Number 14. Science people.
Temperature in degrees Fahrenheit. Which one?
Yes, nice job, nice job. Temperature in degrees Fahrenheit with water. Number 15. Digits in a zip code. Clearly. 16. Wheels on a tricycle. 17. Cents in a dollar. Somebody nice job. All right. Number 18. Players in a football or soccer team. No, it could be 9, right? Our soccer team is 9. All right, number 19. Most of you are like, I have this one. Sorry, how about 20? Okay. Pounds at a time, right?
It's not.
You have very creative guesses though. That counts, in my mind, that counts, right? All right, how about number 21?
On an octopus.
Tentacles on an octopus. 22.
28
Days in February will be there. Nice job. 23. Innings in a baseball game. There we go. 24. Days in here. You gotta love these easy ones. They slip in your hands. 25. Loaves in a baker's dozen. 26.
Yeah.
27. Yes, so I was like that. I just don't sure right away. My gosh, I'm like, trigger everything like that. Okay, let's see, 28. Minutes in an hour, 29. Science people. Pairs of chromosomes in the human body. Number 30. Squares on a chessboard. 31. Planets in the solar system. We're not sure that's right anymore, right? Planets in the solar system. 32. I've never had anyone get this one ever in 17 years.
What's it related to? The topic, science.
Sports.
Wait, give me a second.
Not sports in our country though. It's cricket. Yeah.
Oh.
Balls to an over in cricket. I don't even know what that means. And I'm still All right, number 33.
1,000 years ago.
Yes, years of the millennium, and number 34. One question at a time. Right? Okay, so add up how many you got right. Add up how many. What? Totally not. Don't worry about it.
How many did you get?
How many of you by show of hands got it 6 correct? Look at all you somewhat intelligent. All right, 7 or more. Keep them up if it applies. 8 or more. We lost a few. 9 or more. 10 or more. 11 or more. 12. Oh, we've hit intelligent now. 12. 13 or more. 14. 15. Philosophy, how many did you get?
15.
15? 16? 19? Genius level, right? Okay, so.
Say that though.
So this is kind of fun, right? Though some of you looked a little frustrated in the beginning, right? I saw some heads down, like.
Like, I'm in college.
Right?
I'm
So why is this not a great test of intelligence? Like, it's fun, right? But why would it be bad? We'll go here and then yeah.
It relies on a lot of like cultural knowledge.
Yes.
So I didn't know that there were 66 books in the Bible because I don't know.
Right.
Well, so it just relies on like information you already know.
Yeah, it's very culture specific.
Yeah.
Now they do a good job of one thing. I think that they try to hit on different cultures, right?
That's true.
Or different areas of culture, right? We have some sports, some science, some like trivia kind of things, but it's super culture dependent, right? Like nobody has ever known the cricket one because it's not popular here, right? Versus the baseball one, oftentimes people do know. What other issues do we have that did you have the same thoughts? Yeah. Okay, yeah,
It relies on one category of intelligence.
Yes.
Meaning like it relies on your, like, not linguistic and stuff, like literary abilities, like it
Yeah.
helps you, as opposed to including spatial, as opposed to
Right.
including like other things that include one category only. So if someone lacks
yeah.
abilities in that, they're kind of screwed.
Yeah, so we go back to this, right? It only measures one area of intelligence, one, and not even a really like formalized area. It's one thing. Like, so if you're not good at doing patterns like this or this one little area, your score is going to be low, which probably isn't at all representative of your overall intelligence. Yeah,
There could be multiple answers.
some of them. Yeah. Yeah, like I like some of your answers, right? Like I could vote for that, right? There might be different answers that could be valid. Yeah.
I think another thing, if you're not a native English speaker. like,
Yes.
If English wasn't your first language, this is very difficult for someone whose like first language is not English.
Right.
Or even if you can speak English.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? Even with speaking English, it's tricky, right? So if we look at these things, right, I can standardize this very easily. I could give this out the same way every time, print it the same way. It could have standardization, but reliability would be an interesting one. What if I gave it to you? What if I gave it to you again right now? Right? I would expect that you all would be doing this,
Yeah.
right? You should know the answers. So I could get around that by doing what's called a split half reliability. I could give you half and then give you the other half. And that's one way we can kind of get around that. But reliability would be an issue and validity is the bigger one, right? It's one very small area of intelligence. And so obviously, like when we do intelligence tests, we wanted to have different areas, right? To capture the complexity of intelligence. This does not do that, right? So if your score was low, you can just throw it away, crumple it up and throw it, right? It's just for fun. But I wanted you to see that every test, again, can have its strengths and its weaknesses. There are some things it does well, but there are a lot of things it does poorly as well, okay? Another way that we can assess people, another part of our battery is observing, naturalistic observation, right? This is a really big one, especially again with kids, or if we're like wanting to gather very like unbiased data. So with naturalistic observation, it's exactly like it sounds. We're observing someone in their natural environment, right? So you're watching somebody, it's like people watching with a purpose. I love people watching. Like, it's so fun. I always say this too in my human sexuality class. I love watching couples on dates at restaurants.
Oh my God, so
Right?
fun.
Especially when the check comes, right? Because it's always the most awkward moment, right? You have to be sly about it, you don't want to be like creepy, but it's interesting to watch people. You can get a lot of information from observing, right? Let's say we want to know like what kid or what toys kids are playing with, right? So we can put a bunch of toys out and see who goes for what, which are the popular ones, boys or girls, or like people who don't identify as either one, like go for different toys, right? Like we can get a lot of data by looking at people in their natural environment. We can also kind of manipulate it a little bit and do what's going on here, where we watch someone through like a two-way mirror, and that's called an analog observation. Now, when you do this, people know they're being watched, but the idea is that eventually they kind of forget and they start to act naturally. I don't know if any of you have taken a child development class here, but our child development center has these two-way mirrors. Don't tell Kaya this, but at our oldest, my oldest, I'm hesitant to, I know you're going to tell her. When my oldest went here for preschool, I would go down there all the time and watch her because she didn't know I was there. So after school, I'd be like, I saw that thing you did. And I would just like leave it open to see what she would say. She'd be like, uh-oh. And I'm like, no, that was a good thing, right? But I would go watch her all the time because you could sit in there and watch. And that's often something that they assign to people who are taking those classes. You have like a certain target in mind, or you create something and then you observe it. That's called an analog observation. It's a little more set up than just a natural one. Yes?
You're saying the preschool here has
Yeah.
20 years? I
Yes.
would hear, like, you're gonna have no idea.
Yeah, people were watching you, I guarantee it, right? But the kids don't necessarily know them, right? And so the idea is, even if you know you're being observed, eventually you kind of slip out of that mode and start to act naturally. It might take a little bit, but yeah, and if you don't know, then you do better. Yeah, did you have a?
Yeah, so like, for an example, like, you know the movie, Emma? I don't know what it's called, but it's like a robot, doll, scary movie.
Megan?
Megan.
I'm like, wait, Emma? Yeah.
Yeah, Megan, they have, that two-way mirror observation in that movie.
Huh, I've seen it, but I'm blanking on the part that you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and how she interacts with the robot.
Okay, yeah, that would be an analog
Yeah,
observation.
that's an example.
Oh, that's a great example. I love that. Right? Yeah, you had your. Like for, like, and when you set it up like this? Well, so like with the kids, like you didn't even know, like the kids don't necessarily have awareness of that. But like if you're observing an adult, oftentimes you come into an artificial environment, we already know they're being observed, like if we're brought into something and being observed, but you eventually forget. It's like when they put a camera there and you eventually forget the camera is there and start to act like about it. But it takes a bit, right? And so oftentimes it's just the nature of it, that it's set up in such an artificial way. You are. Self-monitoring is another way you can observe yourself, but journaling would be an example of self-monitoring. So let's say you're struggling with addiction, right? You could keep track of, how often do you use that substance? What are things that might have triggered it? How do you feel before and after? So you can observe others, you can observe yourself, but you get a lot of good data from this about people's behavior, sometimes in like a natural environment, or sometimes in one that we've sort of set up. Another one, probably the most common other than the clinical interview, and a lot of fun to take as well, personality inventories. How many of you have taken a personality test? A lot of you, right? You're going to take one in a minute. If you hadn't, you're doing it today. So personality inventories are really frequently used to get an idea about people's personality. Let's get a kind of a clinical picture of your personality. And the most commonly used one is called the MMPI-2, Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory 2. Really old, needs to be updated really badly. It has 567 questions. It takes hours to complete. Okay, and you answer true, false, or cannot say to each one of them. And it has a ton of different scales. Your book breaks them all down for you. And it's probably the most widely used personality inventory. It tells you about depression, gender, how introverted and extroverted you are. Do you have psychotic tendencies? We use it a lot to diagnose mental illness. Anyone in here taking it that you know of, you would know because it's long, right? Okay, close.
Psych, like specifically, I'm in Montreal, so we use it for our case. Like there's Janice who's a psychologist, and so during our trial, we use an MPI and use like another witness's test.
Okay.
So it's used to determine whether or not they fit like the psychological fit of the player.
Awesome. Okay, I love it because it gives you personality like types and styles, which can be diagnostically relevant or sometimes relevant for legal purposes. Yeah. Okay.
I don't know, like, it's kind of weird.
There's a ton of these different ones, right? This one is by far is the most like comprehensive. Okay. Yeah, this one's very involved, but there are a lot of them that are much shorter and much more accessible. And one of the ones I'm going to give you is very much that way. Yeah,
Measure it, right? 'Cause then you've got self-reported bias in there.
sure.
People just lie, like,
Yeah.
how really good of a measure is it of a person? Maybe
Yep.
focus on the metric.
Yeah, and so what they do to try and counter for that is they ask you a lot of questions in a similar way to look for consistency. And so if you answer one true and one false flag, right? The other thing that happens with this is people get tired and they just start answering randomly.
Yeah.
And that's something that it measures for as well. So it has these built-in scales to look at people faking, lying, or fatigue. Because test fatigue's a real thing, especially when, you're talking hours here bubbling this in. It can take some time. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah, very catered to that population.
Yeah.
Right. I like it. Right. Yeah.
They use questions in the same phrasing or
So oftentimes they'll ask like, so I like houseplants, right? And then I'd say false. And then be like, I don't like houseplants, would be like 200 questions later, and you would hope you answer in the consistent way. Yeah, so that'd be one of the scales on here, right? Are you more like outgoing? Do you get your energy from people or do you get your energy from recharging on your own? But that's one scale of many. And there's another really popular test, the Myers-Briggs Typology Indicator, the MBTI. A lot of people have taken. How many of you have taken this one at some point? Right? Me too, right? It's super easy to take, very popular. So I have an adapted version of it called the CSI. It's a much shorter version. So I'm gonna give this to you, and it's a forced choice. And I'm a Gemini, I hate forced choice, but you gotta pick one. So what you're gonna do is there's 4 questions. And so there's an option for each one, and you have to pick the one that's most like you. So think about how you tend to be in general, not like right this moment, but in general. And so then at the end, you'll end up with a 4-letter plan. So I'll give you a few minutes to take it. And if you've taken this before, oftentimes your results are very similar. So if you remember your 4-letter type, you'll be interested to see if it's the same or not.
They're always fun.
Personality is a little bit. Most of Read the description. So just read through the descriptions and pick the one that's most like you. If you're right on the line, thank you. If you're right on the line between the two, maybe make a note to yourself, right? But pick the one that's closest to you. Oh, all right. That's funny. Yeah, you can put them in the box.
There's a website where you can compare chemistry between people based off the.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and there's also a lot of like career centers, like our career center here uses your type to help you with majors and careers. You can also use it for relationships. Yeah, there's a lot of cool practical applications for the like full version of this test. Yeah. No.
If you letters,
Sure.
Sometimes people won't even
Hmm. Okay.
So the first thing they ask, not even videos, they ask, what is your letter?
Interesting. It's that popular.
Yeah, and
Okay.
if you're like, they're like, oops, sorry.
Move along.
Yeah, no, exactly.
That's interesting, right? You have to lie about your.
No, exactly, right.
You're still going, I'll give you.
It's kind of interesting how people date in places that aren't like the Western perspective, like in the West, people date like off of like opposites attract, I feel like.
Hmm.
Which is sometimes the case, sometimes not, because like some couples are very opposite, will never agree, and then they're just arguing forever like that, and it's not really healthy.
I think opposites attract, but similars stay together.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
But also because I feel like it just depends on the people and if they're willing to grow.
Sure.
But it's interesting to hear about how people besides like the Western Hemisphere actually date.
Yeah.
Because we assume it's the same, but it's not.
That is interesting.
It's a whole other system that you gotta.
I love it.
figure out.
I love knowing that. All right, as everyone, if you're not done, you can keep going, but you're not turning it in or anything. It's just for you. But I put this up here, personalitypathways.com. That's the website that's up here. If you want to look up your type, it'll give you like a whole description. And it says it at the top of your paper too. It'll give you a whole description of what your type means. You can also take the actual test on here. If you were like right on the line between two and you take the actual test, it will sometimes kind of push you one way or the other. I'm an ISFJ, if you were curious. Any other ISFJs in here? A couple, right? So interesting in my mind, I always think I'm extroverted, but I'm not. I'm like introverted. I have a few that are very obvious and then a few that are right on the line. So if you're on the line, you could look up both, but this is a very commonly used test. And as I just mentioned, it has a lot of applications to it. Not always so much for therapy or diagnosis, but it can help us with like careers and a lot of like different like side elements. We use more like this if we want to do diagnosis. So this is more kind of like for fun and pop culture kind of tone. But if we're trying to make a diagnosis and want to know like how somebody's doing on different mental health scales, we would use something like the MMPI, which again, much more extensive, 567 questions. Yes.
There's also, I think the guy who came up with this was Carl Jung.
Mhm. Yeah,
If you look.
one of my favorites.
I know, if you look at his like actual personality theories, like you can go way more into depth with
Yeah.
all of this.
Yeah.
So that's like one of my biggest like interests is this sort of like,
Mhm.
everybody always talks about MBTI, but nobody really talks about like the Jungian
Yeah.
psychology stuff, and I'm like super into that.
Yeah, and we haven't offered it in a while, but I used to teach personality theories here with Psych 16. I haven't taught it in like 9, 10 years. The last time I taught it was when they were born. So 10, 11 years ago, I guess. We used to have that and it was all about the different people. We would go quite into him. Yeah. Oh, I loved that class. I don't know why I think it wasn't counting for anything, so.
I would take it anyways.
I would too.
Some people say like, why don't we have a class?
For real.
Yeah, I mean, I could probably resurrect it pretty easily, but it was that it didn't really count toward anything except the units counted. So it was, I mean, it was always popular anyway. Interesting class. Anything else about the personality inventories? But there's one more big group, kind of a fun group that's left. The projective tests. These ones are really interesting. Okay, so everything that we've covered so far are objective tests. They're typically written, they're very formalized. Projective tests are very unstructured. They don't have a lot of guidance to them. I give you something very vague and you project your own meaning onto it. Now, these are almost never used alone. Like you would never use this to diagnose somebody by itself, but it might be part of your battery of tests. Really, really like interesting. Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah. Like the thematic apperception test is one, the Rorschach plot. We'll talk about both of those. So just for fun with this, I want you to pull out a blank piece of paper. You could even use the back of what I just gave you. It needs to be blank. You're not turning it in, but if you have access to a full paper, you can flip the one I just gave you over. That might make it simple. But I have a little exercise for you. And if you're a very concrete person like me, you won't like this. So it's okay. We'll get through it together. Okay, so on the back of your piece of paper, I want you to draw something for me. Okay, now I am incredibly not artistically talented, right? Right. So what I want you to draw is I want you to draw me a blivet. Anywhere on your piece of paper. I'm banking on the fact that you don't know what a blivet is. Nope. If you know what a blivet is, it kind of ruins the activity. So I want you to draw whatever comes to mind when you hear the word blivet. Now, again, some of you are giving me a list, and I get it. I hate stuff like this. But I want you, whatever comes to your mind, and I'll tell you if you draw nothing, that's meaningful too. So come up with something, and you can put it wherever you want on your piece of paper. On that paper, draw me a blivet. Whatever comes to mind. Don't look it up. I'll show you what a blivet actually is, but draw whatever comes to your mind.
Like, that's, I don't know.
Look at her. She's holding her duster and has it in the shirt.
Yeah, but like sometimes.
Don't look it up. I promise I'll tell you.
But usually there's a friend. Yeah. Okay.
I'm gonna, if I show that.
All right, like one more minute. One more
I
minute.
made 6 frogs.
They're all named after self-partners. Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
All right, are you done with your masterpiece?
Masterpiece, but sure.
Masterpiece. Yeah. You're like, please just end it, right? I know. I'm a very concrete thinker. And so drawing something that I don't know, like I already don't like to draw, let alone something I don't even know. Okay, so this is what a blivet is. It's an actual thing, right? It's this indecipherable, impossible figure where the leg like appears and disappears. Interesting sensation and perception thing. Okay, so the point was that you took whatever came to mind and you put it on your paper. Okay, that's exactly the essence of projective tests. Now, there is an actual test called a draw a person test. Really common to give to children. You ask children to draw a person and they draw whatever comes to mind. Now, the things that they draw or don't draw, include or don't include, are really meaningful, all the way down to little elements. So let's say you tell a child to draw a person and they draw themselves and they draw their family members. Maybe they don't include all the family members. Or maybe what are the family members doing? What are they wearing? How far apart are they? Are they close? Are they far apart from each other? Every little thing that they include in the picture from this perspective is meaningful. Yes. Was that, did you raise your hand and then put it down? Do you want to say something? No? Okay. So interesting from that, we can make a few general conclusions. Now, this may or may not be accurate. Okay, it might reflect your drawing ability and drawing confidence more than anything else. But looking at your image, okay, how many of you drew something small? Okay, maybe bigger. Okay, so size of the image that you drew tends to indicate like your insecurity and shyness. So people who drew something really small tend to be shy and more insecure. Big, you tend to have more confidence and you tend to be less shy. Now, it might also just reflect your insecurity in the task. Okay, so something to keep in mind. Maybe you're not great at drawing or you didn't like the task. And so you drew it small because you just didn't want anyone to see it. So things to keep in mind. So if you drew it big, that tends to represent like confidence. Really big, you might be on the aggressive, assertive side. Okay, it takes up the whole page. If you drew nothing, okay, and I saw a few of you like waiting. I don't know if you ever got something or not, but nothing means you might have been completely overwhelmed by the task. You have a lack of confidence. Again, it could just be lack of confidence in the task. Okay, so just something to keep in mind. Is it something literal or creative? A lot of you drew like little like creatures of some sort. Like maybe you're more creative in the way that you think about things. Or if you drew a bunch of things, like you had a bunch of little things, right? Maybe you're more creative. Or if it's something more like concrete, is it simple or complex? These are things that could translate and relate to your personality. The pressure in which you drew the item, right, that you drew on your paper, it reflects your energy level. So very light energy, very light pressure, light energy, very heavy pressure, heavy energy, right, or like more away from here. At the top of the page versus the middle of the page versus the bottom of the page also means that. Okay, so from this perspective, at the top of the page, you tend to be more optimistic in nature. In the middle, more realistic. The bottom, more pessimistic. Okay, so again, these are all like correlational things that may or may not be true, but it's the idea behind these, right? So you ask somebody to draw a person. If you have kids in your life, ask them to do this. It's really interesting what they come up with. Like everything down to what they put on the clothes is meaningful. Buttons represent vanity, right? For example, so like if they draw big buttons on a shirt, they tend to have more vanity, right? There's a million little like correlations like that. There's also one called the complete a sentence task, where you give somebody a sentence and they have to complete it. When I look in the mirror, I blink, smile, cry, laugh, right? Wave, right? Everyone's going to have different answers. And the things that you come up with from this perspective are projecting from your mind and therefore meaningful. What was that? What do you?
It's the incomplete sentence.
Yeah, incomplete sentence. Yeah, or sometimes the Rotter incomplete sentence blink. Yeah, it has a couple of different names that it goes by. Is there another? Yeah. Yeah, and it's very along those Freudian lines. Projective tests are very Freudian, right? He's the one who kind of created them. Yes. Uh-huh.
I like it. To go
Uh-huh.
say potatoes.
Okay, whatever comes in their mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that idea of like you come up with it out of nowhere is saying that you're projecting it out into the world and giving it meaning. So one of the tests, and you mentioned this one earlier, right? The TAT is one of the projective tests that's used a lot when it comes to clinical assessment. So with this one, the thematic apperception test, we give you a bunch of very grainy, old, ambiguous pictures, and you have to create a theme or a story about what is happening in that picture. Now, again, you are projecting your own meaning onto these images, and what we tend to do is look for themes. Hence the name, right? So we're looking for like reoccurring themes. So I want you to find a few people around you, whatever's convenient, 2, 3, 4 people. What's happening in this picture, right? And there are no right or wrong answers. I will say there are typical and atypical answers, but there aren't right and wrong ones. So find a few people, just take like a minute or two, create a story. What's happening here? I love it. That's so fun though. That's fun. I like it. So again with these, there's no right and there are right. So you give them a bunch of these, and they have to literally write it out. But what do you think? What's happening here again?
I thought that the lady in the back looked similar to like the person, and so I said that like it kind of looks like her but older.
Yeah.
So maybe she's like scared of being old or something like that.
Okay. That's a really common one. This is the same person. It's someone who's younger thinking about being older, someone who's older thinking about being younger. Interesting theme there. Yeah.
My first initial reaction was Snow White.
Yeah. Do you want an apple? There's a very strong theme of that, right? Okay, so Snow White.
It's a daughter and a mom walking in the party, and the mom is saying to her that, oh, that guy likes you, should talk to him.
All right.
So fair.
I love it. I love it. Why not?
It's so fair. Yeah.
So I think it's the woman and the behind girl is like her inner beast, like we were saying.
Okay.
Before, they're both looking in different directions, but they have the same eyes, same eyebrows, and they're perceiving people, and they're like, like, you know, just, you know.
I love it.
Bro,
Okay.
that's like the substance.
Okay.
I thought that since the shadows of the faces are on different sides, I
Hmm.
thought that there are two sides of the same coin. The older woman represents like maybe bad things that she's done, or things that she
Okay.
carries, but she ignores because she's not looking at that same direction.
Interesting. Okay.
It's like the old lady represents her demons, and she's not definitely dealing with it.
Okay. Great. All right. Yeah.
I also, I don't remember. I don't, never mind.
Okay.
Yeah.
Changed your mind. Yeah.
That shadow behind her is like it's following her around.
Oh,
Like almost like a horror story where she's like.
it's Valak, the defiler.
That's exactly what we thought.
Yeah.
Like, trying not to hurt her because I don't know if she did something
Okay.
Probably stole from the grocery store.
She stole from the grocery store, right? How dare she? Right, I definitely think that's a very common, she looks a little like sinister, right? Like, I always think of Valerie, but I'm a huge horror movie fan. There's something interesting about her fingers. Like, you notice they look very bony, like, and so sometimes people hone in on that as like making her evil or dark or like sinister in some way. Yeah,
Whoever's, it's like relevant but not relevant, whoever said that it looks like she's about to give her an apple, it reminded me of the scene from Enchanted where Hippie goes, "You're like, it's gross."
okay. I don't know if you're that specifically, okay?
I just saw this now as we were discussing, maybe like, you said, but then I was like, what if it's like the evil stepmom that you can't, not the evil mother-in-law you can't stand?
Oh, not the evil mother-in-law, right?
Sometimes they're actually, I don't know.
I don't think I've talked about my mother-in-law yet, either, but I always talk about my mother-in-law. She's the sweetest, kindest person, not so sweet, so kind, but she's given me food poisoning like 57 times. As long as she doesn't cook, she's a wonderful person. Because she doesn't cook, I don't know what's wrong with her. 21 years in my relationship, food poisoning like 20 plus times. So when she cooks, I'm like, fling it off. Okay, so as an interesting side note, not a single one of the things that you came up with, just so I don't have to yell, okay? Not a single one of the things that you came up with was like abnormal in any way, right? Like they were all like within the realm of normal or typical. Nobody, or did anyone maybe think the person in the front wasn't female?
I originally did.
Okay, right, so very interesting, a lot of themes of like gender sometimes come up in this, of like transgender, or maybe this is someone who's male, less common, but it sometimes comes up. So, we see a lot of like interesting themes emerging, so like maybe somebody looks at this and they're like, well, this young person just told their grandma that they're considering like committing suicide. Okay, so that would be a red flag, because they put that onto this picture that was very like neutral, okay? Or this person just told their grandma or their mom that they're planning to do like something violent, and the mom is like, yeah, I like that, right? She looks a little mischievous, right? So you get these interesting themes that come up of people projecting their thoughts onto these images. Now I have another one, but we're almost out of time. I'll save it because it's very we'll say rich in content. We'll save it for next time. Probably better anyway. So what I want you to do, I have a homework assignment that I'm going to give you with this chapter, but I'll give it to you next time. So if you see the announcement pop up on Canvas, you can ignore it for now. I'll give it to you on Monday. So Monday, we'll finish up chapter 3, and then chapter 4 is Monday. Very exciting. So have a wonderful weekend. Enjoy the rain. Drive safe. I'll see you all on Monday. Okay.